gentlemen, it's Eric Coffin. It is Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. I'm here with Darwin Green, CEO of HighGold Mining, company that I follow in the HRA newsletter. Darwin put out some news this morning that I thought was quite interesting. Actually, it's a couple of drill holes that were decent drill holes, but really, I mean, to me, the most interesting thing is the sort of the impact it has on your modeling. And it seems like a lot of things moved around based on what you know now, based on these drill holes. Can you walk us through, what was in these holes and why it's changed the way you're looking at this part of the project area?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the one thing about geology and drilling is you learn something new with every new hole that you put down, right? It's an iterative science, and you're constantly updating your geologic model, and you're thinking about what's happening. And we came into this project with a pretty good base, but we're finding new things and we're learning new things. And one of the takeaways was we hit a brand new style of mineralization. It's true looking VMS style mineralization. It was close to 8 meters width, real zinc rich. It had just under 1 gram gold, lead, copper, the classic group of metals with it. It was in a sort of a muddier unit. Not entirely unexpected, given the nature of this deposit is really this kind of hybrid between the two. But this is the first time we've seen something that looks, truly VMS-y. And that has significance in its own right, in terms of, us going along exploring and one, expanding on this mineralized zone, which consists of one or two holes now. But it also tells you something about the greater opportunity on the property and how you go about exploring the property. The other takeaway was, which I think you're alluding to, is the evolution of our geological model. The insights we gained from this drilling. There was one of our primary targets going into the 2020 drill program was the so-called northeast offset, which was, we know our deposit is cut off at some point by a fault, or at least a part of it is. We know a lot of it is still available to keep expanding on the one side of the fault, but certainly some is most definitely displaced. We had a pretty good read where we thought that was, based on some historic drill results that had stuff that looked similar to being very near to the deposit. There was some gold, the alteration, which is so distinct at our deposit, we were seeing up there. And there was an structural interpretation based on a fault that was up there. Well, it's turned out is we were not quite right. We were a bit wrong. And we, in fact, where we were drilled, there's a second fault. Instead of one fault that kind of wrapped around, there's two faults. And, I can show you on a map. It's probably the best way to show what's happening here. So, these are the figures that came with the news release. On the left is a geology map, and on the right is a cross section. The cross section is from the northeast offset way up here to the north. It's about 700-800 meters north of the main deposit. So the main deposit is down here to the left. I'm maybe I can't make my pointer a little more visible. So yeah, so the deposit is sitting down here. Shown on this are the drill holes that we completed this year. The ones that have results for them out already are in black. We still have some that we're waiting on results, like through here and elsewhere. Anyhow, so from a fault standpoint, there was this dacite fault that tracks along the edge of the deposit, and at depth, it cuts it off. Right. There was another fault. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
No, I just said right. I'm just agreeing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a fault up here that was called the saddle fault that was previously interpreted, or by the previous operators, to be the same fault. And as you went from the south to north, it seemed to roll a little bit. And that can happen in a strike slip fault where your dips change. Well, what we've learned is it's actually a separate fault that has come in over top of and cut off the dacite fault and the stratigraphy below. So what that's done is basically decapitated, and then you need to look below that package of thrust over rocks to see what's going on. And long story short, this is the saddle fault coming down through here. Here's the drill holes that we've drilled. we went through this fault, and it turned out that this fault is actually cutting off the dacite fault down here. And what's happened is the vast majority of all the drilling up there has actually been west of our main fault that displaced the ore deposit. What that means is this can't be the displaced part of the ore deposit if it's sitting on the same side of the fault as our deposit down here. So if we go to the south, we don't see this fault. All we see is this part of the stratigraphy, and our ore deposit will be sitting right in the same location in here. So the significance of that is twofold. One, to find the offset, the displaced part of the deposit, we need to be further east, over on this side of this fault. Two, there's a huge area that's virtually untested that's in that domain to go test. The other
I think in
aspect,
fairness to the past workers too, that when you look on the map on the left, you show the dacite fault projection there, but when you look on that cross section, you can see saddle cuts it off completely. So dacite basically doesn't sky out up there. The only way you'd know it was there was to cut, I guess, to cut both faults in a drill hole and go, wait a second, how come there's two faults here?
No, that's exactly right. And it takes time with geology. It's on the fly thinking when you're drilling up there to figure this out. But that image started to become clearer towards the end of the program as we drilled this. So what you see on this plan view map, we actually show the dashed, projection of where this dacite fault hits the saddle fault here. So this point here is shown in this dashed gray line. So we need to be further east. One of the other really neat things here is then that begs the question is, what were we actually hitting up here on the west side of the fault? What is that? And what it is another zone of mineralization. It's not nearly as robust as what we're seeing down at the main deposit. And what we are seeing is this massive sulfide that's sort of looks like it's a little bit up section. We still have some work to figure that out on that, but it looks like it's sitting sort of above our anhydrite. So under this model, our main deposit to the south would be sitting in here. And this is just a little bit up section of that, which kind of makes sense geologically. All of that said, there's a little more work to be done. But what this is telling you is that, well, if there's some mineralization up here and you've got this big gap in drilling, there's probably a lot of opportunity to find more mineralization along that trend. So this coming season, we will be both looking for the offset side over here, and we got to come up with a new name because now we got too many northeast offset type target names, but you know what I'm talking about. We'll be looking for stuff over here. We'll be following up on this massive sulfide to see what that blossoms into. We will, one of our principal priorities is actually just keep chasing the deposit that's on the west side of the fault down plunge, because it's open, and that's, if you look at our long section of our ore deposit, there's a lot of room to keep chasing that. But we'll also be checking this big gap here. We think there's room to find more min in here. So really we were disappointed this summer that we didn't hit the offset displacement. That was one of our principal targets. This in the end really opens things up, and we're quite excited about the plans going forwards here for the summer.
Well, yeah, and the stock reacted pretty well today, and I think the reason was the drill holes were okay. There's nothing wrong with them, but I got a feeling a bunch of people may have bought back in, saying to themselves, well, it's not so much that they missed the offset, they weren't actually drilling the offset. Where the drill holes were going is not where the offset would be. Now, I know Johnson's kind of a weird duck. Is it something like in a traditional VMS camp, for instance? And I don't know if obviously none of us know if this is big enough for this to work, but I mean, gravity is pretty helpful with VMS. Is there any other geophysical stuff that you're thinking like, well, this wasn't done before because it was thought to be something else. Maybe we should take a shot at this at the start of the program. Is there anything like that you're thinking of targeting wise?
Well, yeah, actually we are. So one thing we are thinking of doing, or are planning to do, we're trying to line it up now. We will see is an airborne survey, geophysical survey, and that would be probably mag and EM. Don't know, most of this looks pretty sphalerite and galena rich, so still don't know if it's going to be a proper conductor, but that would be the idea, to see something like that, is see if it's a conductive body. Right. It's a useful tool for mapping anyways, and for just the resistivity contrast. We see it like even our clay alteration zones at, say, Difficult Creek, and over top of the deposit here, we get a different geophysical response. So it's a good tool. There was a little bit of historic data done back in the 80s, early 90s, but it was very wide space lines and pretty poor quality data. So yeah, we'll be doing that, and it'll be interesting. And, you know, as we follow up on something like this with drilling, you know, you might consider borehole EM. I'd like to see something become a bit more chalcopyrite in the system to give you that really good conductor. But yeah, no, for sure. And, you know, if you go back to, it's kind of a, you know, you look at our kind of our geological model, if you will. This was generated for a recent technical talk by our chief exploration geologist, Nathan Steves. And it captures a lot of things. I mean, it's a cartoon, but it's an effective cartoon about what's happening. So you may recall we hit this copper silver rich feeder mineralization or string of mineralization. Well, that's when we hit that in 2019, we had one hole into it. I think it was 20 meters of 2.5% copper and, you know, 60 grams silver and a few percent zinc. We didn't know what to make of it. We didn't know if it related to our deposit or not. Well, after this year's drilling, we hit a bunch more of it, and it's quite clearly linked to the main deposit. So when this formed, it would have formed when the rocks were, you know, in a submarine environment. At least some of them were in a submarine environment.
Right.
And roughly kind of coeval or at the same time as when those volcanic rocks were being deposited. And so this was feeding up, and there was a unit here that was very permeable. It's a pumice-rich dacite tuff. It has other types of tuff in there, but that seems to have been the host where this mineralization came up and bled along. That's where we get this big anhydrite halo around that with the ore. You know, that's where the bulk of our ore sits, being fed by the stuff below. Well, at our main deposit area, this whole thing has been tilted on its side and it's been faulted off. So we don't see what's up section, but one would infer up section that it's conceivable that this thing eventually breaches surface, you know, and that's at the, you know, be underwater surface, and you might get true blue massive sulfide development. So that looks like the kind of thing we're seeing now up where we are. I'd love to see it, you know, given we got almost an SK-like kind of signature to this deposit. It might be nice to, you know, see if you can get some of those real boomer gold grades up in that massive sulfide. For now, we're seeing most of that gold in this part of the system.
Right.
This is a useful model too when you look at Difficult Creek, which is 4 kilometers to the north. There, we got very high level, low sulfidation epithermal veins up at the top of the ridges. There,
Right.
you know, we get anywhere a couple hundred grams silver up to 1,800 grams per ton silver, low sulfide. They really look very high level. As we go lower in elevation of that prospect, we see gold. As we approach this sort of dacite tuff, there it's in an overlying andesite, and then you get lower, closer to this dacite, we are seeing gold, a significant gold at lower levels. So that's a prospect where you might go, okay, well, let's drill below there until you get down to the dacite, and you might see this kind of mineralization. So this kind of captures a lot of what's going on the deposit. And, you know, this medium gray here would be that key horizon. That's your dacite stratigraphy. And so anywhere along that plane starts to become quite prospective. We've just kind of faulted some of it off. So part of this presumably would have kept going, whatever this ore deposit here is, and been displaced. So we'll be chasing that this summer. And this whole other part of the deposit has actually got a plunge to it. So we've got a lot of room to keep expanding that part of the deposit just by stepping out down plunge. So we'll be drilling all of those this year.
And you've got a lot more, I guess you've got a bunch more dacite to play with now too. Or at least you've got dacite unit that you previously thought was on the wrong side of the faults and wouldn't have had anything bleeding into it. But now that you've got this VMS there, you've got all this dacite on the other side of the fault that really hasn't had much done with it in the past.
Oh, that's exactly right. There's very little on the other side of the fault, and then a long trend. You've got to remember when we, I guess, acquired this property, you know, it wasn't clear what was controlling the mineralization. There was a sense that maybe these faults themselves were the control, or there's some cross structure. Now that we know there's a certain element of primary control within that dacite tuff, and that a long trend, you're finding mineralization within it, it really does open up the opportunity and potential here to find a whole lot more. And that's in addition to just stepping out on the deposit itself.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's quite understandable to me why people reacted well. And of course, we're we're getting close to mid-March now. I think you guys are, I mean, you're looking at probably taking a shot at getting up there a little bit earlier this year. I mean, COVID is settling down, and to the extent it isn't, you've got, you know, pretty standardized protocols now. So, and plus you've got rigs and everything, they're already up there. So
Yeah, we do. You know, it's we've got 3 rigs sitting on site. We're planning to get up there sometime in May, as early as we can. We may even get up there earlier to do some of the geophysical work. You know, Alaska has the highest vaccination rate of any state in the U.S. and
right.
I think they're even vaccinating essential workers that are from out of state now, coming into the state. So yeah, it there from that standpoint, we're going to have a much bigger runway in front of us in terms of field season. Last year, we didn't arrive on site until like July 1st and fired things up and got the drill program. Now we can get going in, say, mid-May. And last year we started with 2 drills and then added a third partway through August. And we drilled right to the very end of October. So that was about 16,000 meters. So, you know, we got a lot of room. We're going to start out with an initial phase of about 15,000 meters. That's what we're tentatively looking at right now. It hasn't been set in stone with those 3 drills, and it gives us lots of scope to expand, and we're fully funded for all of that and then some.
Well, and thanks to the magic of of assay lab delays, we're in March, and you still got 10 holes to report, man.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Isn't it great?
If you'd ever asked me if this was possible, I mean, we have another 200 rock samples from surface work, right, from all the regional prospects, and we really like those regional prospects, right? And yeah, I sure hope we have them all out before we start the drills again. You know,
yeah, that's crazy. It's just insane, but you know. But there you go. And people are worried about a drop off in news flow. There probably isn't going to be one because you're still waiting on some stuff from last year. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of, okay, this is what we're going to do this year releases before you actually start running around up there. And the stocks come back a lot. You've got, what have you got? About, I don't know, 30 or something? I'm not sure what you've got cash wise these days.
Oh, well, we've got 17 million Canadian in the till. We've got another 4 million of in the money warrants that are well in the money that come due in September that be pretty shocking if they don't come down. So, you know, we're planning, you know, mentally thinking we've got 20 million to work with this year.
Right.
Last year, our budget was 10 million Canadian for Alaska. You know, we got 3.5 or 3.7 flow through to spend in the Ontario, and we have 2 years to spend that.
Right.
You know, and you should probably recall we're doing a lot of that compilation work right now with the idea of hitting that harder as we're starting to feather things down. And in Alaska, we'll probably be picking up in Ontario and then going for many months after that.
Okay. So
now, one other thing I was going to point out on this map, just because it's a busy map, but the anhydrate that you saw on that model here, this purple,
right,
that's really our indicator. It's kind of the very diagnostic alteration of being fairly proximal to the deposit that tracks out in the day site. And so we've shown here an outline of from the drilling done to date. This is a working model that's evolving, you know, may extend well beyond this, but that's that gives you an idea of the footprint we're kind of playing with. And obviously we don't know anything out here where we haven't drilled yet.
but were there many holes by past operators sort of in, you know, just kind of northeast of where your pointer is right now, where you've got this, you've got this huge area of anhydrite? I mean, I don't know whether that's just topographic or does, you know, does that mean?
Yeah, there's a couple of, well, there's a couple of our holes here that we have geology for, but not, and then there's a couple other holes very nearby that were historic. And then there's some pretty big gaps before you get back up to the northeast offset. Okay. There were a couple of holes that kind of pant-legged the area. They didn't really, you know, while they were there, they didn't really test the right rocks, if you will, as well. So now there's a fairly genuine gap here, but there is some more drill data between here that's helped us develop this this model. And it's you know, as you say, it is an iterative science. You go out there, you drill some holes, you collect new data. We've standardized all that data, ours and the old data, and it was part of our master plan, was to develop a 3D geological model, alteration model, structural model that extends from south of the deposit to the north end, way up here. That's still a work in progress, but the idea is to get all of that into Leapfrog, develop that, and then we'll have very, very specific targets when the drills start turning in late May.
Okay. I think I mean, that's it. That's you got lots of good detail and lots of color on today's release. Yeah, I think the message that I took away immediately was there's a lot more room here. That was always the concern from day one with JT was, it appeared to be cut off. I mean, earlier releases you put out showed it was not in fact cut off down plunge within the immediate deposit area anyway. Today's release tells us, well, the most logical place for the offset to be hasn't actually been tested yet. So there's still that. And I really like the stuff up in Difficult Creek. I really like those targets a lot. I think there's a lot of good news going to be coming from this company this year. Cashed up, ready to go. Lots of news flow, lots of high grade target in 3 or 4 different areas are going to be testing this year. I think it's a great story. HiGH on the venture. Thank you very much, Darwin Green, CEO.
Always a pleasure, Eric, and hopefully I didn't do too deep of a technical dive.
No, I mean, people like these. I know my marketing friends are always horrified when they see these 30-minute videos and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, people actually like these. They do, they really do.
Right on. Well, it's great to have the opportunity to kind of walk people through it because it is a bit technical, but the picture is much clearer, certainly on our side of the screen. I mean, we're really happy with where we've got to with our understanding, and pretty excited about what's to come this summer.
Yeah, no, it looks great to me. Thanks for coming by. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Darwin.
Take care.